going to introduce you to the first piece of C# for this assignment, and it's going to be a fairly complicated class, and I won't be expecting you to code this. I'm going to give you a text file with all of the code in it because it contains one or two little tricky things that I don't think you would understand, and it's unfair for you to be able to do that at this stage, although we need the class almost as soon as we start coding the rest of the application. And that's the ImportData class. And I've called it a factory class, and that kind of means something special to me. It means I'm going to use this again and again, and I do. I use this class to whenever I'm using a text file in order to get the data I need from the text file and get it back into the application from the external source. So it's really important to me that I can use this type of application class again and again. Another one that I've used again and again, I would also call a factory class, would be an authentication class, where we have a user who supplies a username and password, and we check whether those username and password details that have been given match what's held in a database. You write that once, you'll use it again and again, and it's my name, a factory class. It's not an official name, it's just what I call them because I think it describes how I use this code. So what we'll do is we'll look at the way in which it works, and I'll go through it line by line so that you understand what's happening. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put some compiler directives in here. Now these are statements which help us understand which pieces of the C# system, and it's vast, we want to include in the module that we're creating. Now C# produces a default set. It's a kind of a base standard, if you wish, for what may be included in an application. And in fact, in this particular module, we don't need any of them, but we need a different 3. So these are what are called compiler directives or preprocessor directives. And what it says is that before you make the code work as a computer program, we'll get these libraries into our module so that we can use them when we're working our code. That's the preprocessor bit. So it gets those preprocessed into the application first before we start to write our code. And the next part we're going to do is the actual code itself. So I've got it on my clipboard, and as I say, I'm going to supply it with it as a text file for you. Right, it looks complicated, and in fact it is a wee bit complicated, so let's just understand what's going on. This is a method signature, and it says in order to run this particular piece of code, I'm going to call getTextDataFile, and I'm going to give it an argument of a string, which is the file path to our text file. And that's why you put it as close as you can to the root of a drive, so this becomes as short as possible. Okay, so this particular class uses the I/O to give us access to what's called a stream reader. And that also helps us to put the data that's held in the text file in a particular way. It's read one at a time until the reader can find no more to put into the file, to take out of the file, and put into our application. So the first thing it does is it sets up the headers for each column. Now each column is split by a comma. String headers is an array, so there's going to be more than one. And it reads line split by commas to get the separate headers for our particular text file. And that means that this is generic and can be used with any text file of any number of columns. So that's why I've built it as a factory class. Now the next line is data table. Data table is a type of structure that puts structured data inside our application, and we can read through it. So I've called our data table, that's the type that we're going to declare. The name of the object I've got is DT, that's just short for data table, equals new data table. So this introduces the next concept I want you to understand. Whenever we want to use a class as an object called DT, we have to say data table, new data table, and we're calling it DT. Except in our signature for our application, you'll see this word static. What that means is that I can use this method without using the word new whenever I want to work with a file path and get the text that it contains into our application. So this word static is special, and when we come to use it, you'll understand why it works and why it's so efficient. It means that it maintains its values between calls, and so therefore it doesn't have to be instantiated when we start to use it. Right, so here's the next structure. You'll be familiar with this from, I'm sure, some other code that you've seen. This is in our data table. For each string header and headers, columns add whatever we find as a header. That gives us the number of columns in our data table. It puts each one as a separate column heading, and it's got the name that it finds in the text file. So what we have to do now is go through this data table that we now have, or this text file, and add the strings it finds in the text file into the data table. Now, I don't expect you to fully understand this, but let's just go with the flow. While not stream reader end of stream. So we created a stream reader, SR up here. So it's reading through, and it's going to go through every row of the stream reader that it's found. String rows equals. Now this is a particularly difficult thing for you to understand. I don't expect you to do. What it means is it matches patterns. Regex is a way of matching patterns, regular expressions. And it's a complicated way of applying patterns into the file. So that means that I want you to look for items which match the comma and any other of these dividers that we might have between the items in the stream reader. Data row equals new row. So I'm going to put a new row into my data table and then go through each one of the bits of data that it finds separated by the commas and put that in as a data item. So effectively it's like copying and pasting from that text file into a spreadsheet, and it's going to put it into the rows and columns as it finds the data. Having done all of the rows and it's got to the end of stream, it returns the data table as we said here. So we now have a data table containing all the data from the text file that we can now use in C# directly. It's imported it.